I've told a few other tales about weird shit during my Marine Corps career. A lot of people like them, so I'll throw down another for you. Be sure to look at the others if you missed them. So back in late 2007, I was attached to an MEU, or Marine Expeditionary Unit. It's my first deployment. We embarked on the USS Shreveport, which was an LPD, which I have absolutely no idea what it stands for. But it was an amphibious assault ship, which meant it carried Marines up to an enemy shoreline and launched a platoon of amphibious assault vehicles carrying infantry, as well as a couple of giant hovercrafts, called LCACs, which carry everything from tanks to gun trucks. Sometimes it just launches AAVs to carry Marines into foreign lands, to train on foreign bases and train foreign troops, which is a lot less fun than it sounds. They're usually third world troops who were conscripted that morning. Training them or with them is usually a confusing, dangerous, and frustrating process. Plus, they usually smell bad. It was also the reason our platoon was sitting in the ass end of an old ship getting a briefing about something we already knew how to do. We were going to splash off the coast of Kuwait, land on Kuwait soil, and go train with Kuwaiti soldiers on how to be Kuwaiti soldiers. Don't worry about your tax dollars being spent. The host nation usually pays us to do it. And remember, the platoon commander said to the school of Marines gathered before him, we'll be landing on the boat ramp next to New Guy Pier. So what's that mean? Strong currents. And the thing that we don't talk about. So stay on your toes. Crew chiefs, make sure you have weapons available. And if you've never landed at New Guy Pier, oh boy, will you have a story to tell. Don't be the guy to hit the pier. Our first round's on you on our next Liberty port. Sea state shore should be at 1. Nice calm seas. Make final preparations to the vehicles, and let's have a safe day of operating, and once again, remember not to talk about it, gents. I looked around in confusion. The senior staff non-commissioned officers at the back of the school circle were glaring daggers at the lieutenant. The sergeants were rolling their eyes in a "this dumb motherfucker" fashion. I noticed a few of the more salty corporals, one of which happened to be my crew chief, staring at the LT with mouths open. They couldn't believe the lieutenant was dumb enough to even bring it up. As I was walking away, I heard our platoon sergeant saying, "Well, now they're going to talk about it, sir." That last word was laced with as much respectful disrespect as the gunny could put into it. Well, that was certainly a bizarre splash brief, I remember thinking. Thing we don't talk about? The hell does that mean? I looked over to my crew chief, the guy who commanded the vehicle I was assigned to, walking through the upper well deck towards the vehicle which was parked back in the rear, behind most of our platoon vehicles, the place I needed to be. I had questions, and he would have been a nice guy to ask. "Corporal?" I started with that confusion in my voice that all boot Marines seem to have. "What's that thing we don't talk about?" He stopped in his tracks, turned and glared at me. "It's the fucking thing we don't talk about, dumbass," my crew chief said. As you might have guessed, there's some agitation in his voice. Aye, aye, Corp," was all I could say. It was best just to avoid the ass chewing by dropping the subject. Our rear crewman caught up with us as we walked to the track. I knew he was going to ask the same question I just asked. I looked over my shoulder at him and shook my head, trying to look as salty as possible. He gave me a questioning look. I nodded my head towards the crew chief, looked back at the rear crewman, and shook my head. He gave me a what the fuck face. I responded with the facial equivalent of a shrug. You knew exactly what I meant. Boss don't want to talk about it. Nonverbal communication is a vital part of the Marine Corps culture. I've seen complicated concepts discussed at length with only grunting and pointing. We really are just a pack of trained apes. Got in the vehicle and started making final preparations for the ship-to-shore movement. I just finished checking the generator belt and put the engine panel back on when I looked behind me. My crew chief was pulling an aluminum baseball bat out of his bags. The grip was neon green and the barrel was black. It had the word "Psycho" printed down the thick end, this in neon green as well. He looked at me. He must have seen the curious look on my face. He brought the tip of the bat up and drew it across his lips. Shh. I was getting kind of annoyed with all this don't talk about it shit. What weren't we supposed to talk about? Was it hard to land on that boat ramp? If there's some shit I need to know. As the driver, I should know it. But I knew that I wasn't going to get an answer, which was some bullshit. The crew chief reversed the bat with one hand flip, holding the grip out towards me. Something on his face softened. My weapon of choice for this sort of shit. Put this in the turret for me. I grabbed the grip and made to pull away, but he held on. I looked up from the bat to see his face. His eyes drilled into mine. Remember, I got your back. Whatever happens, you just keep this big bitch swimming. That's your job. Put a hand onto the radio cage. A bit of a love and affection towards his 26-ton amphibious war machine. She's our slam piece and likes to take care of her studs. His eyes turned down towards our rear crewman, or dungeon master as was the nickname for his billet. You usually ride in the troop commander's hatch and splash with no infantry embarked. But when you ride down here in the dungeon, make sure the hatch stays locked. Might get a little weird back here, since that dumb fuck lieutenant ran his mouth. He punctuated that statement with an eye roll. Keep your eyes on that fucking lock. Released the bat into my grip. I knew I had to have had a stunned look on my face because it was a fucking stunner of a speech. I looked over at our rear crewman. He had a duplicate, wide-eyed look on his face. Well, put the fucking bat in my turret. Or you'll be busting rust and track blocks until our fucking shit glows. The threat of an endless task lit a fire under my ass. I climbed up into the turret and shoved the bat into the back of it, where spare 50 cal ammo went. He had to be fucking with us, I remember thinking. I felt something tugging on my leg. I looked down into the troop compartment. My crew chief was holding up something that looked like a folded up harness of some sort. Put this in there too. Damn, Corp, I said, taking the harness. What kind of freaky shit you getting up to in here? Oh, you'll fucking see, he said with an ominous grin. I climbed out of the turret hatch and got up to the top of the vehicle. To double check that gear we kept stowed in cargo racks was strapped down. I took a look down into the well deck, and the giant LCAC sitting on deflated airbags. I noticed one of the sailors who crewed the thing, walking across its giant open cargo deck. Nothing looked unusual about him, except he had an old-school naval cutlass strapped to his waist. This motherfucker think we're off the coast of Somalia? I remember thinking. Expecting pirates? Time passed quickly, and I found myself sitting in the driver's station of my vehicle. The S end of the ship had opened up. The LCAC had already left the lower deck well. Sailors up on the catwalk on both sides of the whale deck, using flashlights and hand signals to guide us into position. One by one, the AAVs were given the signal to drive out of the back of the ship, splash into the Persian Gulf, in 300-foot deep water, and hope like hell nothing went wrong. The anticipation was driving me nuts. One would floor it out of the back of the ship, and the next tractor would slowly trundle into it, take its launch spot. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was early in my career, and this sort of thing still held a lot of excitement for me. I was watching the red light at the end of the ship. It hit green and I floored it. I was doing my best to make it to fourth gear, because if you go too slow, it's possible to nosedive that bitch and ride it all the way to the ocean floor. That's where you don't want to be. So, you want as much speed as possible when you drive off the ship. The Trek roared as it gave me everything it had. I managed to catch another gear, and it made it into third gear before the ground dropped out from under me. Yeehaw! The Trek hit the water nose first. Usually they bob back up, easy peasy. This time, though, was different. I watched the ocean come up in front of my vehicle at me, through my little vision block. My view went from bright blue skies to a murky green infinite expanse. It was surreal. Now, normally the Trek bobs back up instantaneously. Not this time, though. The Trek sort of hung for a second, nose down in the water. It felt like forever. but it couldn't have been more than a couple of seconds. Almost felt like we were pushing deeper into the water. Pucker factor was in play. I eased off the throttle out of reflex. I finally felt the track starting to pull back up towards the surface, and I let out a sigh of relief. But right before my vision block broke the surface, I caught the impression of something moving, way out of the edge of visibility. It looked big. That's all I caught when we brought back to the surface.
Track 9.
My crew chief called out over the radio, his voice coming through my helmet.
Feet wet.
I didn't have time to think about the big moving thing as I had to clear the way for oncoming vehicles, so I gunned it and pushed it further from the ship. As we got about 50 meters out, before I let off the throttle again, I threw my hatch open, pulled my seat up so I could ride with my head out, and had full visibility. I looked up at the turret. My crew chief had popped his hatch as well. His upper body was out of the turret, and looked down at me and gave me a thumbs up. I nodded and gunned it. The track roared and surged forward. I had noticed that he was gripping the baseball bat in his right hand. It was a pretty uneventful moment, for the most part, up until the halfway point, when shit got weird. We lost external comms because, of course, we fucking did. The crew chief got the attention of the other crew chief in the track behind us, and with the use of hand signals told them that the comms were dead. All you can do in that situation is keep it pushing and hope you don't need immediate help. Nothing you can do in the middle of the ocean. Relax and enjoy the ride. I was cruising along, just enjoying being off the fucking ship for a bit, when I looked down at my gauges. Temps were normal. Pressure was good. Fuel gauge was acting a bit wonky. No worries, though. I knew I had a full tank of JP8 diesel. I looked up from the console, and there was a hand sitting in front of my hatch. A human one. The arm was hanging down the side of the vehicle. I just stared at it for a moment. It hadn't been there a second ago. That's not supposed to be there, I remember thinking. The pointer fingers started moving around at first, and the rest of the fingers followed suit, rubbing around on the rough surface like the hand was looking for something. I felt a shadow overcome me. A green blur came out of my right side of my vision and impacted the hand and sent it flying, skittering over the side and into the ocean below. I felt more than I heard the bat clanging off the vehicle's skin. I looked up and my crew chief was standing above me, his bat in hand. He was wearing the harness. It was anchored to the turret. He looked down at me, pointed 2 fingers at his eyes, one at me, and then at the ocean ahead of us. The Kuwait coast about a half mile in the distance. Watched the road. I turned my attention back to the water in front of us.
Corporal?
The rear crewman came over the inner vehicle comms.
The rear hatch handle is banging against the latch bar, like someone's trying to open it.
That was unusual. Even in heavy seas, the back door handle rarely moved. It was made that way.
Keep an eye on it. Make sure that bitch stays closed. I don't care if you have to put your boot on the fucker and ride like that.
He looked down at me.
Keep it swimming, boot.
He didn't climb back into his turret. He just stood on top of the vehicle, rolling his legs along with the bobbing and rolling vehicle so he could stand up. His eyes scanning around the edges of our track. Fucking weird bullshit, I mumbled. I caught sight of the crew chief moving slowly towards the edge of the vehicle, doing his best to stay upright on the bobbing vehicle, swatting his bat at something outside of my sight. I kept it pushing towards the coastline. I would occasionally see the crew chief moving around behind me, out of the corner of my eye. I turned to watch him swatting at something with a bat. I looked past him to the track behind me. That tractor's crew chief was out of this turret too, patrolling on top of a vehicle, swinging an axe at something I couldn't see. Just what the holy fuck is going on? I said to myself out loud. The front of the vehicle dipped as we were riding through the wave. There were no waves to be dipping in. I spun around to face front. Hands. Hundreds of hands. Gray, bloated fingers gripping anything they could find purchase on. The tractor felt like it was being pulled down nose first. Water started rushing up in front of the vehicle. That was bad. If too much water got in the top of the vehicle, then it would collapse the barrier that keeps the water out of the engine compartment under the weight, and the flood tracked faster than our bilge pumps could even keep up with. We'd sink. "At R12! I yelled into the intercom through my CVC helmet while backing off the throttle. The crew chief ran past me, baseball bat swinging. Every time he made contact with one of the hands, their grip broke open and they fell back into the water. Some would raise back up out of the water, but my crew chief seemed to be making pretty good headway against them. I could feel the nose start to rise back out of the water. I ripped the throttle open wide, trying to get us out of there. The old tractor gave me everything it had. It wasn't that much. It's got a maximum speed of 8 knots in the water, or a little over 9 miles per hour. Not exactly get the fuck out of here speed. A hand came out of the water and grabbed the crew chief's boot, pulling his leg out from under him and planting him firmly on his ass. He seized up, his body going rigid. Initially, I thought he might have hit his head, until the water started spilling out of his mouth. What the fuck? He looked back at me with eyes wide open. His pupils started rolling to the back of his head. More hands grabbed his legs and started pulling him forward. I reached out and grabbed the carry handle on his plate carrier. I'm a big dude. I can pick up heavy things and put them down, but this was like trying to pull a dump truck out of quicksand. I took my other hand off the steering yoke and grabbed one of his shoulder straps and started pulling him back.
"We got fucking problems back here!"
My rear crewman screamed over the intercom. "We got fucking problems up here!" I shouted out loud. Didn't exactly have a free hand to key out the mic. He wouldn't have heard men over the noise of the engine. My crew chief was limp. His eyes were open. All I could see was a white socket. I braced both feet on the console of the driver's station and pulled with everything I had. I was keeping him from sliding, but I wasn't pulling him free. I reached down to the knife I kept on my body armor and yanked it out. I shifted my one-handed grip to the front of his body armor and leaned forward until I was almost way out of my hatch. I started slashing and stabbing the hands. They were withdrawn when they took some damage. I caught one at the wrist, almost severing the hand. It withdrew, almost taking my knife with it, hand flopping around uselessly on the end of its stump. A black substance that I mistook for blood sprayed from the half-severed hand, splashed across my face, and I got a taste of salt water. I ignored it and continued pulling my crew chief up from the nose of the vehicle. The second the last hand broke contact with his leg, he regained consciousness immediately and started vomiting out what looked like water. I pulled back into my hatch, one hand on the steering yoke, one arm protectively over the vomiting Marine. We were free of the hands for the moment. "Fuck, that sucked," he said, spitting out the last of the saltwater puke. "Oh, you one boot." He sat there for a second, getting his head right, before picking up his baseball bat. I noticed that we were getting closer to the pier. About 200 meters, maybe. It looked ancient, like a holdover from the 1800s, which it might have very well been. It was off to the left of an old boat ramp. I also noticed that the front of the tractor was starting to nose up out of the water. Crew chief noticed it too.
"You good back there?"
He asked the rear crewman through his CVC helmet.
"Fuck no!"
He damn near screamed over the intercom.
"I'm fucking ankle deep in water back here. No idea where the fuck it's coming from. It's just coming through the damn deck plates." "Piece of shit must have pulled out our drain plugs,"
the crew chief grumbled mysteriously.
"We aren't that far from the boat ramp. If it's only ankle deep, we're probably gonna be okay. Just let me know if you get balls deep."
The first of the tractors was already on land. I could see them tearing ass up the boat ramp. I looked back at the crew chief. I shot him a thumbs up. We were almost out of it. Started to return it, but a wide-eyed oh shit look graced his features instead. That's when I felt my throat squeeze shut. Like I just stuck my neck in a fucking vice made out of fingers. My lungs felt full and something pushed up my esophagus. Seawater. I felt it draining out the corners of my mouth and out my nostrils before it forced open my mouth and sent water spilling down my chin. Felt like there was no air left in my body. It's the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. I kept trying to suck in mouthfuls of air, but all I could get was more seawater. My vision grew dim, shrunk down to pinpricks of light, and finally went black. I had a sensation like I was floating. I opened my eyes. Nothing but blurry, murky green as far as the eye could see. I didn't even have a note of panic through my mind. No notion of kicking off my boots and swimming up, but I didn't reach for the cord hanging out from under my body armor, the cord that inflated my life jacket. I didn't even think to pull off my body armor. I was just content to float there. Never felt that calm in my life. No worries, no nothing. Even when I started to sink. The water got darker the further down I went. The murky green slowly fading to black. I heard a noise that sounded like a metal pipe clanging off of something in the distance, but I ignored it. I felt my eyes getting heavy. I barely considered fighting it. Why stay awake? It was so nice down here. I heard another clang off in the distance again. Louder. Closer. I looked around at the dark. There was some sort of warmth growing in my chest. I savored the feeling. I could have stayed down there forever. I heard one last clang. This time it sounded like it was next to my head. Air rushed back into my lungs and I was jerked back into this world. Bright Arabian sunshine flooded my world, harsh as hell after being in that watery void. I was hanging out in the driver's hatch. I was alive. I felt like I had to vomit, so I did. Water rushed out my throat and hosing down everything in front of me with a salty froth, leaving me with a feeling like I just applied a belt sander to my esophagus. My crew chief was looking down at me. He flashed me a thumbs up. I just stared at him, feeling and most likely looking like a bag of mashed assholes, before I finally managed to weakly flash the gesture back at him. He nodded down at me and pointed to the front of us. We were about 20 feet off of the New Guy Pier, floating towards it.
Straighten us out.
I did my best not to slam into New Guy Pier. I really did. When I was pretty out of it, I mean I had just been pulled back into the world of living and vomited my guts out. You get put in charge of driving a 26-ton armored amphibious vehicle after that, and you tell me what you do. I just got my bearings back when I felt the track slam into the pier. It wasn't a bone crunching hit, but it was enough to seriously dent some of the armor plates installed in the sides of the vehicle. The jolt sent the track slamming into the old timbers, wrung the fuck out of my bell. I looked at my crew chief. He shrugged it off with a "don't sweat it, kid" kind of motion. He was too tired to be pissed. I could understand that. I felt like a well-used punching bag myself. Outside of that, coming ashore was fairly easy. I guess the god of shallow current riptides was a forgiving one that day. I felt the tracks meet up with the concrete of the boat ramp, and the vehicle stopped floating. It was the sort of feeling you want to bottle up and keep for later. Finally safe. I flipped the switch that took the vehicle from the water mode to the land mode and charged up the boat ramp, ready to be out of that fucking water. Tractor felt heavier than normal, with all the seawater it had packed up, through the missing hull drain plugs. We pulled off the ramp and moved to the side of the road leading off of it. We let it idle for a minute, before letting the back ramp down. Gallons and gallons of water came spilling out. Along with anything that wasn't strapped down, all of our shit above knee level was soaked. The platoon's commander vehicle was about 10 feet from ours, parked in that spot, so the lieutenant could watch the vehicles come ashore. He turned and grinned at me from his turret. He motioned for me to take off my helmet, so I did. The words suddenly got louder. Without the sound dampening effect of the CVC helmet, I got the feeling that he had a pretty easy time coming ashore. I think the hands may have missed his track.
"I saw that,"
he yelled over the engine noise, sounding positively giddy.
"You hit the pier. That means the first round is on."
He was cut off as he dove out the way as a black and green baseball bat came hurtling at him.
I hate that fucking boot.